is a nice Apple laptop.
And of course, now we're live. Thank you. They didn't hear that part. But anyway, so we're live, everybody. This is the enormous UFO Super Show number 11.
Yes.
And we're going to have, unlike last week where I only talked for 20 minutes because there was like nothing happening. Oh, then Mother Nature decided to throw some curveballs.
Just one or two.
Or 3 or 4 or 40.
42, yeah. Or 42.
Yeah. So, because we're going to probably have to discuss what happened in Indiana and Ohio earlier this past week, where they had what I would consider to be probably one of the bigger tornado outbreaks this year that was not forecast.
Really?
Oops. And I saw several tweets. I saw one from Rick Smith, and this is probably something we'll probably try to shy away from, is a lot of people were jumping on SPC for screwing it up. And are you said, oh, the show isn't, okay, you're trying to send me the link to this show, right?
Yeah.
Okay, wait a minute, just a second. I'm
going to post it online. I apologize, everybody. I interrupted.
Yeah, oh, come on. Okay, here you go. So anyway, back to where I was discussing. So a lot of people, he was trying to make sure that not many people are going to be like jumping on him because they screwed up.
Correct.
I wouldn't say they screwed up. I think they just weren't. And this probably brings up a point that a lot of very good SPC forecasters have retired. And August outbreaks tend to be very, from what I gather and have seen in the past, outbreaks that occur like this in August are very unpredictable. You don't know where they're going to hit. And when you even have a 2% chance of a tornado somewhere, are you sure there's even going to be tornadoes there or somewhere else that you don't know about? Like in this case, because they had that day.
Correct.
Thursday, Wednesday, someday. It was a day early in the last week where they had a 2% chance of a tornado in northern Missouri and southern Iowa. Nothing happened there. It all happened because I was gone most of the day and I came home to look at my radar, and I looked at my radar, and there's some little rain falling around here in the state of Iowa. And then I happened to just take my Gibson Ridge, and I looked over to the east, and I saw what looked to be about 10 tornado warnings, and several of them were purple on my Gibson Ridge, which meant they were tornadoes confirmed. And I'm like, okay, I didn't know there was going to be stuff there, and evidently neither did anybody else.
Speaking of that event, I think I may have somewhat figured out, and I think most everybody else has anyways, that's in the professional weather community that really dug into it. I think I figured out what happened with what caused that event.
Yeah.
We had a round of showers and storms in the morning that quickly moved off.
Yes.
And it released enough warm air into the atmosphere to create its own MCV.
Yes, I think so.
And that MCV, while the showers and storms didn't really remain, that vortex and the inherent vorticity in the air that accompanies that ran into that air mass in Indiana. And I think that was what the final straw was to touch off that outbreak.
What and I mention this because some people, I did see some tweets earlier from that day later on where it said that there was a chance that there could have been a tornado in Indiana. I know Sean Ash at WTRH in Indianapolis tweeted this earlier way before the event started, that he was showing model data that showed that there was an enhanced risk that there could be a tornado. Note, a tornado, not a tornado outbreak.
Correct.
It brings up, like I said before, August outbreaks. When you don't get these, you don't never hear of, oh my gosh, August, whatever, big outbreak. Outside of Plainfield, which was an August outbreak, the one that hit Plainfield, Illinois, and
correct.
So people, that was an August outbreak. It was somewhat forecast, but I don't think they were forecasting big wedge tornadoes flattening cities. And similar to this, we had from that event a few days ago, we had, I wouldn't call them big wedge tornadoes, but they were violent tornadoes. For example, the one that hit Kokomo, Indiana, that flattened that Starbucks.
Yes.
And there's and I'm sure you may have seen this video of the person that was in a bar or something, and they were watching TV. They had their power on, and the TVs were on and the power was on, and then the power flicked off, and the guy or person went out to the window that was right next to the bar, and he looked straight across the parking lot to see the Starbucks get flattened. Because the building was right next door. Their building had from what it sounds like, had no damage, but the Starbucks got flattened.
Correct.
Talk about a tornado that's like picking and choosing what to hit. And that tornado is an EF3. You very rarely do you get outbreaks that have these big tornadoes that are like EF2s, 3s, and whatnot, unless it's a hurricane, which this was not. It was not even a remnant of anything. But so I think a lot of people kind of started, because there was a lot of TV weather people that started wondering why it was so badly wrong and whatnot. And I think it's going to have to be studied as to why SPC the morning of said no, and then all of a sudden by afternoon, here's tornadoes everywhere. I think these August outbreaks, you almost have to think, okay, here's a 2% tornado risk. And we had, I think, one or two more after that nothing happened. Later.
Correct.
So what's the difference between, this here was a 2%, nothing happened, but here's a 2% this day, and something happened 500 or 600 miles further to the east? So.
Well, I think the thing that differentiates this one is there was nothing in even the models like that morning that even hinted at there even being a substantial tornado risk anywhere over Indiana or lower Michigan. Ohio.
Yeah.
There just wasn't enough there to warrant it. And I think a lot of people, chasers included, skipped over it because they just didn't see anything. They didn't see anything that really said, hey, this might be chaseable. But the one thing the models did not pick up on was that line of storms that came through here in the morning, generating an MCV.
Yeah.
And I think that was what created or what made the atmosphere supportive for tornadoes. Was there was obviously enough, instability, but that MCV running in there also added shear and vorticity. And apparently it was enough to touch off a bunch of tornadoes.
Yeah, I'm bringing it up right now because this was on Wednesday. As you can see here on this thing, and I gotta get it. Wait, come on. I gotta get this working. Okay, here we go. See, here it's just where the tornadoes were, right here. But the risk area, and this was, they did move the risk area after the storms developed. So we can't fault SPC for saying that they never moved the risk area, because they did move it. Earlier in the day, I think the first outlook, they had the 2% tornado risk here in northern Missouri and far southern Iowa.
Yep.
And most cases, most times, 2% tornado risk means, big whoop. Storm chasers do not go for 2%.
Unless it's the first event of the year.
Not in summer. In the spring, maybe, but it not when it was a slight risk, because it was a slight risk that day on Wednesday. But if it's like a moderate or even an enhanced, and it's still 2%, there's a better chance that you'll get something, and it could be some tornadoes. But you look at this, and all these tornadoes that went from just north and west of Indianapolis up to Toledo, Ohio, and there was even a tornado up here in Windsor, Ontario. That you have big tornadoes. And not all of them were big. There were several that were big. A lot of them were violent, but they didn't last. Well, several of them lasted quite a while. I'd have to go back and look at how many they came up with. But we had 42 tornado reports. How many of them were the same tornado? We don't know. But
we may never know that.
But you look at this, and even when the severe tornado threat was still going on over here in Indiana and Ohio, they only had a slight risk. I think at that point, I'm not going to fault SPC for it because it's neither here nor there. It's like Monday morning quarterbacking. They probably should have at least moved it up to enhanced, because at that point, you have tornadoes and they're pretty much in the same region from north of Indianapolis through Fort Wayne to Toledo. And people are going to think now slight risk could mean anything from tornado outbreak to nothing. Because southern Iowa still had a risk area that day, a slight risk, but they took the tornado risk, I think, away. But nothing happened. As you can see, there was only a few wind reports, and that was it.
Well, my question is, since nobody else across the rest of the country, as I open my squeaky door, since everybody else in the rest of the country didn't look, or didn't really see anything, what did the rest of the people, like NWS Indianapolis, NWS Toledo, what did they see and what did they not see?
Well, I know for a fact that I'm not aware of what the Weather Service was doing. I know TV people, I think, were somewhat caught off guard as to what was going on, because here's the this was the risk area from the first outlook on day one. Here's where the tornadoes were. They had a marginal risk. As you can see, here's the slight risk from that day, from Wednesday. And this is the big kahuna. There's the tornado risk. Now, the tornadoes weren't there. The tornadoes were over here. So and this was the first day one outlook, and I can bring up the second one. That was the one that was done at just after midnight. Here's the morning. This is morning. This is at 7. It's be at 8 a.m. Note, slight risk has been shifted south. That's because of the rain that kind of in Iowa up here that kind of cooled and stabilized the atmosphere, so the slight risk got shifted. Mm-hmm. Which was what you discussed. And as you see, slight risk. Now, there was severe weather here, but not as bad as over here. And as you see, we can, let me get this down. And there's the tornado risk. I will make a mention, as the tornado warnings were started dissipating in Indiana, Ohio, there were, I think, 1 or 2 down here near Kansas City.
There were.
But I don't think they were confirmed. Maybe, oh, no, wait. I think 1 was, but maybe. No.
All I saw was just radar indicated.
Okay, yeah. Then here is this was 11:30. Now the slight risk is shifted into Indiana, but it's from about Indianapolis south. You still see the tornadoes were from about here. So even at 11:30, as you see, there's the tornado risk. Okay?
I think you brought up a really interesting point. Can you go back to, and that's the very next risk, correct?
This was the risk at 3 p.m. or 4 p.m. Eastern. Now
this is while the outbreak is ongoing, correct?
Yes. At 4 p.m., Kokomo, Indiana has already been hit.
Correct.
And Kokomo, Indiana is about right here. At this
Go
point,
back to the
look what they
previous
now
outlook.
put up. This is when they like, oh gosh, tornadoes. So
Go back to the previous outlook, the one just before.
this 1630,
Yes.
this one.
Yes. The entire area that's covered by the outbreak is in a marginal risk.
Yes.
Okay. And we now know, hindsight being 2020, that a tornado outbreak happened in that marginal risk. And this was the last outlook before the event truly kicked off.
Yes.
So I think there's a really important takeaway here for normal people that may or may not see this, is that it doesn't matter what level your risk area is. What matters is that you are in a risk area, and this event proves that. It's evident that the SPC saw something. Otherwise, they would not have put that area in the marginal risk.
Yes.
They saw something. So they are not at fault. They did the right thing.
Yeah.
But again, I think this goes to show you, it doesn't matter if you're in a marginal risk or a high risk. If you're in a risk, you could see potentially life-threatening weather, and it needs to be paid attention to, and it needs to be respected.
And I would go on this too, because with this new 5-tiered system, the marginal risk used to be C-text. Now,
Correct.
Imagine this. If they were still using the 3-tiered system like they used to, you would be having this area in a C-text.
Correct.
Imagine this. A C-text, people would be like, who cares? A C-text in a 3-tiered system, if they were still using that, would have meant a C-text, and you would have had tornadoes. I think even with this new 5-tiered system, this is like elevating things that we're not sure, so-and-so, whatever. So, but then this brings up a point, because and this has happened in this market, and I'm sure you'd be note about this. TV stations don't broadcast marginal risks. They're like,
Correct.
who cares? For example, there's several TV stations that'll say, because they use the number system, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Correct.
Many stations regard marginal risks as boring and dull. And they're like, why bother frightening people over something that may or may not happen? And I think this is what caught a lot of people off guard. The Weather Service probably not as much between Detroit, Cleveland, or Indianapolis or Northern Indiana. The Weather Service offices there. But TV stations, I think, were cut off because I don't think they were totally staffed properly for saying, oh my gosh, severe weather, come to work. Because if they had known that there was going to be marginal risk, I think in most cases, especially in, let's say, like Indianapolis, we'll use that for example. It's a large market.
Mm-hmm.
You probably have at least one weather person, probably two, working. And pretty much probably a weather producer. So you have people there, but they're like doing their normal stuff, because most people, in larger markets, they have like the 4 o'clock news, 5 o'clock news, and 6 o'clock news. Well, in some markets, the same person does the 4, the 5, the 6, and then the 10 or 11 in the case with the Eastern time zone. Whereas some stations, they have people doing like 4 and then 6 and then one doing 5 and then 10 or 11. And I think in Indianapolis, they do this, except most of their stations. But then with regards to, let's say, Fort Wayne, they don't have that because it's a much smaller market. It's smaller than the market we're in, the Cedar Rapids, Iowa City, Waterloo, Dubuque market. They don't have, luckily, the tornadoes were in their far southern reaches. And then there's Toledo, Ohio, which is about a market similar to Des Moines in size or in population, where they have enough people around. But you would need people to come to work, oh my gosh, tornadoes on the ground, at the point that you could have 2 people and you would probably be able to work it if it was a normal tornado warning, nothing on the ground.
But a tornado outbreak is completely different.
But this one was tornado on the ground. We have 3 or 4 of them at once. And at that point, you have to, and this reminds me so much of the April 2006 event that was here, April 13th, where that complex of storms in eastern Iowa, and every single one of them was producing tornadoes. They pretty much, I think, at that point, in that event in 06, they pretty much had to go, okay, here's a storm. This is a tornado on the ground, going this way. Boom. Next storm, here. This storm, tornado on the ground. It's similar to almost like April 27th, 2011.
Yeah.
Where you had to just go boom, boom, boom. It wasn't the same coverage. Most of these were supercells. Because I did see the radar. They were all supercells. But they were kind of like, they were like dotted. Some areas probably didn't even get rain. Except for later on, because I think it's somewhat of a complex of like multi-cell storms came through later. But
yeah, they were very LP, it seemed like. Because I didn't see a whole lot of rain come out of those. Like what you were saying. I didn't see a lot of rain, which suggests me that they were somewhat LP in nature or low precipitation.
I think they were either LP or classic. I don't think any of them were HP.
Correct.
There was rain with them. I wouldn't say they were all LP. They were probably about half and half. I think as they got toward Toledo, Ohio, when the storm started to weaken and the spinning, the rotation started to lessen, and I have a feeling that was mainly due to maybe lake effect from Lake Erie blowing in from the west, because Toledo is right on the western end of the lake.
Yep.
You have the wind blowing off, because you notice the storms got right up to Toledo and then they stopped, and then nothing happened after that. Yes, the sun was setting, but I think they also got the air coming off the lake right up here. Whoops, and I gotta go back to my thing because I got messed that up. So sorry.
Whoops.
Not that one. Where it got up to here and you had a slight lake breeze. Because the storms went from being tornadic to almost barely being severe. And of course, when they cross over the water is what, 70 on Lake Erie? It's in the summertime, it's in the low 70s.
It probably barely made it over the border to Canada before.
Well, Windsor, Ontario, which is across from Detroit, had a tornado. It was a decent tornado. I saw a video of it. It was a decent tornado, and I was thinking.
But Windsor doesn't have a lake right next to it. If you look where Windsor is, look to the east, there's not much of a lake. I mean, there is in that part of the peninsula on the other side. But if you
have Windsor is right.
Reference Windsor as compared to Toledo, Toledo would have the most influence of the lake effect, like you described, than Windsor would. There's a little bit more land around Windsor.
Yeah,
so I think that's why they saw the tornado.
This peninsula, yeah. Toledo did have a tornado. It was very weak.
Yes.
It was like on the southwest end of town, because there was reports that there was small. But it was more getting toward nighttime. The storms were starting to dissipate a little bit, but I think the lake, some kind of lake breeze that I think had blown off of Lake Erie, I think they caused the storms to become elevated. Because anytime you get a thunderstorm could come, it hits a lake breeze. It could do one of two things. It could either strengthen and rotate, because you'll have conflicting wind coming from the lake and coming from
wind shear,
which this one didn't do, or the storm is immediately elevated because the boundary layer has moved off, and now the storm, the height of the bottom of the cloud base gets lifted, which is what causes it to be elevated.
It causes it to not be surface
when the cloud base is too high. So
it causes it to not be surface based anymore.
Yeah, when the surface base, the boundary layer moves up off the surface, and then the cloud base tends to rise, and then you don't get tornadoes. You still can, but it's more difficult. You're not going to get tornadoes. You'll get weak little spin-ups, like land spouts. And we could even go on to this, where Oklahoma had a rash the next day after this. They had a rash of land spouts the next day.
Mm-hmm.
So, which they didn't last long, but it was I think, concerning to the fact that I felt like, okay, Oklahoma has to have tornadoes evidently in August now. So,
but I think it all goes back to what I talked about earlier. In the end, when you're looking out for your own safety, it doesn't matter what level you're in, whether you're in a marginal or a high. Heck, I'll even throw general thunderstorm risk in there. If you're in a risk area, you know, I don't want to sound too alarmist, but I think it's true. Your life in some ways are in danger. Because if you're in a general thunderstorm risk, you have lightning to contend with. All others opens up the book to everything else in the severe weather spectrum. Granted, there are conditions that limit the potential for some modes of severe weather over others, but they still have to be paid attention to, because this is the perfect example. This event here is that perfect example where level put out, there wasn't a whole lot of model support for a full-on outbreak, and there wasn't much clue as to it really coming. Even in models, I think I'll have to go back. I think where you're going to find a smoking gun are observations in central Illinois, north central Illinois, and
outside of Chicago because of the lake. But yeah,
correct.
Rockford down to Springfield, and then maybe east to Indianapolis.
Correct. I think those ASOS observations and observations from any NWS offices that are in the area, those I think will tell the real story. Because like I said, I think the biggest influencer on that outbreak was that mesoscale convective vortex that was formed out of the complex of storms that we saw that morning. It drifted east, it ran into that warm, moist, unstable air, and gave the atmosphere just enough shear and just enough vorticity to set things off. And that's frankly dangerous, because this event was nothing like April 27th. April 27th, 2011, for 5 days before the event happened, everybody was screaming, hey, this could be a potentially historic event. This could be massive. You know, some of the internal talk was already comparing that event to April 3rd and 4th, 1974. And that was 2, 3, 4 days before that event even touched off. There was none of that here. And yet, a similar type of situation evolved. Granted, we didn't see hundreds of tornadoes, but we did see a bunch in one pretty specific area. And that needs to be paid attention to by the general public, not just forecasters. The forecasters here did just fine. You know, we win some, we lose some. We did just fine, but I think we lost this one. But that just means that until meteorology becomes a perfect science, the general public needs to pay attention just a little bit more, so they're not caught kind of with their pants down.
Yeah. I have the radar here, and there's this complex, see here, and then it dissipates over Indiana, but then you see new storms form, and these are the tornadoes right here.
Yep.
Right there. There they are. This one also was tornadic for a time too, and then it dissipated. But then this one, this little line of storms caused all the trouble.
Yep.
And you look at that, and you look at this radar, and you think, oh, well, this storm must be really bad. Nope. It had 2 severe thunderstorm warnings. 2. This line had at least, what, 12.5 tornado warnings? And many of them were confirmed. It's
Correct.
apples and oranges. One storm can look really cool on radar because it has lots of heavy rain. But then this little batch, you see there's little breaks. This is hard because I can't really zoom in because this is like way out. But you can see that this is supercells. And I don't think they were expecting supercells to form when earlier in the day, look, it's pouring rain. How many times have you ever seen where it's pouring down rain at midday or in the morning, and then you're thinking, oh, the atmosphere is ruined? Storm chasers see rain like this, where I'm putting it on right now, where I'm pointing, and they're thinking, oh, there won't be severe weather today. Would you like to take a guess? SPC forecasters probably thought the same thing.
Correct.
That's why they only had a marginal risk and not anything else. Because they pretty much thought that this was going to clean out the atmosphere. It didn't. Because as you can see, and I'll bump it back, and there we go. They reformed. You have to expect the unexpected with August at this point. So, but
Very, very true.
And you see that these storms, because there's the one that went through Windsor up here, and it looks like this looks like a little tiddlywink boring thing. I mean, radar, it's all great. You'd think this storm over here was bad, these storms here were bad. There was a tornado warning with this storm right here, but you look, this does not, you look, SPC forecaster is going to look at these storms and think, okay, bad. They're going to look at this and they're going to think, that doesn't look serious, except for the fact that those storms were producing tornadoes, but neither here nor there, because I just hope that this is not going to make SPC switch around, because it's like the swinging pendulum, that they're going to go, oh my gosh, something like that's going to happen again. Let's issue a risk area. And then they risk it's you don't want to start over warning, but this was probably a case of under warning. I'll say this, the warnings, the tornado warnings were perfectly great. Everybody had very good lead time that bad weather was coming when it was coming. It was the beforehand that they didn't know it was coming.
It was the forecasting.
Yeah, the up until, as we promptly showed, up until midday, they were thinking there wasn't going to be severe weather or very little severe weather. But as I'll say again, expect the unexpected in August, because you never know when a small little system like this can come through and produce something bad like Kokomo, or, for example, back to 1990 when you had the tornado in Plainfield. That was a day where there was I think it was a slight risk. Might have been a higher risk, I can't remember, but that was with a cold front that was coming in from the northwest. And it didn't look very particularly exciting, but it produced a major tornado and it killed 30-some people, which made it, I think it was the only, and I'd have to think, was it the only EF5 or F5 tornado in August?
Yes, it was. Plainfield, Illinois was the only F5 tornado ever documented in the month of August.
Yeah, so I think SPC was had it to the point that August tornadoes typically are small, weak, and don't do much of anything.
Correct.
But then if the atmosphere is just right, you can get stuff that acts more like April or May in August, especially when we've not had really hot weather of late. It's not been really horribly hot, but you have these cold fronts coming in, and it kind of, you have dew points a little higher. It'd be somewhat similar to maybe like an early to mid-spring event. Something like that. It's not quite, but
my question is, I keep staring at this radar presentation of those storms in Ohio. It doesn't look like there was much even upper echelon dynamic support for all these tornadic storms. there wasn't much of a large system in the area in terms of like a massive low pressure system that was really deep and in and of itself created a lot of shear and vorticity. This was all very small scale stuff.
Oh, I got that going for you. So here we go.
Here we go. Bingo.
Yeah. Okay, just a minute. I gotta get this to the radar. So I have to. Okay, so let me figure out which one I got to do. About there. That'd be 14. That would be at 0100. So that would be 8 o'clock. So let me do it back to about 2. This would be about here. This is when most of the tornadoes were. So it'd be at 12. So it'd be 2300. So this would be at 6 p.m. our time. So it'd be 7 p.m. in Indiana.
Correct.
And they had numerous tornadoes. I mean, this is what's bad about Kokomo. They had the first tornado at 3 o'clock. Then they had another tornado on the ground west of Kokomo 3 hours later, which was confirmed. And then, if it wasn't bad enough, another storm west of Kokomo started circulating, and it produced another tornado warning. I don't think it was on the ground. So I think Kokomo, Indiana was under like 3 or 4 tornado warnings. And this was after the fact that they had already had a tornado. The first storm produced a big EF3 tornado. And then all of a sudden you're having multiple tornadoes at once. I think people in Kokomo were probably thinking this was way worse than anything they'd ever seen. And I don't believe Kokomo got hit by April 3rd, 74. There was tornadoes around Kokomo, but I don't think I ever heard of anything hitting Kokomo.
Let me look that up.
Okay, while you do that, because I'm going to look at the millibar, the upper air analysis, because I was looking at that earlier. But
Great
before
idea.
that, because I was looking at the 850 chart from 12Z, because you can't look at 0Z, because by then the storms are already starting. You have to look at the preview. Like the 850, right off the bat, you see a low, kind of in the 850. And look how it's occluding. You kind of see it kind of curling back like this. And right here, you would have an inflow jet. Right about here. This was at 7. This was 7 a.m. or 8 a.m. Eastern. And it was centered about right here. Illinois, Wisconsin, into Michigan. Probably about the time if I moved it to 7 p.m. or 8 p.m. You see it kind of flattens out, but look at the wind right here. You can still see what looks to be somewhat of an inflow. It looks like the way it's opening up at 850, because you look at this and it doesn't look all that impressive, but I mean, I'll bring it down to 925. You can still kind of see something here. I mean, the 500 millibar chart didn't really show much, because you look at this. This was at 0Z as the tornado outbreak was ongoing or just about to end. It doesn't look impressive. Not so much. And even at 7 a.m. or 8 a.m. Eastern, there's strong winds. The temperatures are minus 9 Celsius at this level. So it's decent, not overly terrible. So I think it's because this, even at the jet stream level, you can see it's strong here and here. And I think this is why they probably thought there'd be tornadoes here, because it was right at the end of at the exit point of higher winds at the jet stream level. So.
Okay. Kokomo was sort of involved with April 3rd and 4th. Well, I'm actually looking at Google Maps. They weren't involved at all. I take that back. I apologize. As my dogs start barking violently. The closest tornado to Kokomo, Indiana, during the April 3rd and 4th, 1974 outbreak was the Monticello, Indiana tornado, which occurred on April 3rd, which was also during that outbreak was one of the longest tracks of that outbreak at 109 miles.
Yeah.
And I believe that was rated an F5.
F4 or 5, I don't remember which. Now, this is the radiosonde data. Now, here's, as it's exciting going on at Maximus.
I'm going to go check that out. I'll be right back. I'm going to hit mute.
Anyway, while everything's going down at the house of Matthew, the interesting thing is this is from Lincoln, Illinois' radiosonde. Now, the first thing you notice, as many of you probably are already aware of, you look at Indiana. There was no radiosonde data in Indiana because they don't have data there. Maybe they need to. I'm not being facetious, but I think they need to have radiosonde data there. But it's not neither here nor there, especially in Indianapolis, they should. But you look at this. This is at Lincoln, Illinois. This was at 7 a.m. You look at the wind at the surface, south. It then goes to southwest and then west. So there was some turning. Not overly so, but it was, whoops. So it was turning. And you look at it, and it was decent cape. Now remember, this was in Illinois. They didn't have severe weather in Illinois. And it pretty much showed that there was a bit of an STP, but it was more centered toward non-toward, meaning very little tornado. Well, at least I'm hoping. I'm glad it said it was going to rain. But you look at this, and it looks a little, it looks messed up. But the interesting thing, and I'm going to have to bring this up so I can find it. Because now they're giving me, I don't want that one. I don't want, why do they have one at Yuma? I don't know why that is, right? So if you do the data, say, let's do the data at Detroit. This was as the outbreak was starting to end. This was at 8 o'clock Eastern time for Detroit. You had a south-southwest wind that went immediately to west. Not overly strong by any means. You look at this, and it doesn't look particularly exciting. The STP levels were low. Weak and kind of significant hail on here, but nothing too exciting. But you had nothing that was screaming, oh my gosh, bad weather. So it's an interesting thing. Oopsie. Okay. This was when, because I'll go back to the tornado watch. The watches. They had three. There was 3 watches. This was the first one they issued. This was issued at 3:10 p.m. Eastern time. And you can see here's the counties that were in it. And it said tornadoes moderate. EF2 tornadoes are high or low. So it's your standard tornado watch. Well, if we bring up the initial radar, there's the storms at the time. There's that little complex we showed earlier. And we're kind of going all over the place. They're not going to show me the radar warnings at the time. But at this point, this storm right here, I think it was this storm, 3:10 p.m. Eastern time. Kokomo's tornado had already occurred. It occurred 10 minutes prior at 3 o'clock. So they had a tornado warning with a tornado on the ground before a tornado watch. That's neither here nor there about them kind of messing it up. But remember, the outlook that I showed earlier, this 20Z outlook, hadn't been issued yet. So everybody was still in Indianapolis, which is right here, was based on what had occurred at what was 12:30 Eastern time, which is the 1630. What did 1630 show? Marginal risk of severe weather from Indianapolis north. And
as I return.
So Matt has calmed the dogs down. Anyway,
yes.
As I was saying, this watch came out at 3:10 p.m. Eastern. and Matt may or may not have heard this, but the Kokomo, Indiana tornado has already occurred.
Okay.
There was no watch. And remember, and I'm repeating it for Matt's sake, everybody in the TV in Indianapolis and whatever was still basing it off of the 1630Z outlook, which had marginal risk from Indianapolis north. And marginal risk in this case produced a major tornado. And in fact, by this point, by 3:10, I believe not only Kokomo had a tornado, but I think Crawfordsville, Indiana had a tornado. So there's been now at this point, when the first tornado watch was issued, 2 tornadoes, one major and one smaller. And the radar showed, I think this was Kokomo right here, I think.
It's a little farther south.
And this one was Crawfordsville. So, and then you can see the other cells forming. These would be tornadic later. But you look at this, and I think this may have thrown a lot of people for a loop in TV or whatnot, that they were still looking at the SPC outlook, the original one, the first one from 1630, the one we showed where they only had a slight risk down here. They had, added the slight risk in southern Indiana. But then they have a tornado watch in central Indiana, in northeastern Indiana, sort of close to Fort Wayne, and into a few counties west of Dayton. So you bring up this, and it kind of is concerning. And then that's a severe thunderstorm watch over there, so we don't care about that. Let's see if this is going to work. Come on, work, please. We'll see if it's going to work. It may not. Oh, there it is.
Ah, there we go.
They issued this tiny little tornado watch because they added counties to the other watch. As you can see, they added counties further to the west into that original watch, which we can't unfortunately put in here. But you can see they issued it because of this cell and I think this cell. And then these cells were still producing tornadoes too. So, and then this is the storm up here that I think produced Windsors. It was this storm way up here. That's near Detroit.
Mm-hmm.
So you look at this, and we go back to the first outlook, this outlook that shows, and we're back to this. This is the outlook when the tornado watch was issued at 3:10 p.m. Eastern. This is the outlook that they saw. This was the SPC outlook. We bring this back again. The tornado watch was up here, was up into this area, marginal risk. And I'm kind of we're going around in circles, but it brings a point that I think they were thrown for a loop because this was the SPC outlook that was on the website, because 20Z does not come out until 3 p.m. Central Time, 4 o'clock Eastern. By then, the tornado watch has been in effect for 50 minutes. There's already been tornadoes on the ground, destruction. Luckily, nobody got killed that I know of, thank goodness. I don't know. I think nobody was killed. But, and we're going to not stay on this long because we got more events. But this is what happened. It's probably going to have to be studied. And if it isn't studied, we're going to make it be studied. Because it's.
I think this is going to be, for some sprawling meteorology student, myself included, I think this is going to be one heck of a master's thesis one day. A complete breakdown of the meteorology of this event and bringing forth some suggestions as to how to forecast this. Something I think fairly important is going to come from this event, because I think it caught enough people with their pants down just enough to where people might, in the professional weather community, might start paying attention a little bit more to setups similar to these.
Yeah, and it might be earlier than what we think. It might be as early as this coming school year that they'll do master's theses on this, especially Midwestern people or at Oklahoma, because they love to do severe weather.
Yep.
But that wasn't the only thing that happened. Last week nothing happened. This week tons of stuff happened. we then bring up the deadly flash flood event in Iowa. And we're both in Iowa, so you're like thinking, well, you never got to this thing first. And I'm thinking, yeah, this would have probably been the main topic if it wasn't for let's have tornado outbreak. That was kind of not forecast quickly enough. Anyway, it decided to rain and rain and rain and rain and rain and rain in northeastern Iowa. Now, for those that wouldn't know what that area, northeastern Iowa into Wisconsin and far southern Minnesota, it is very, very, very hilly. There's a lot of creeks, streams, rivers that are like gorges, similar to, let's say, like Colorado with mountains, where it's like you have a river and it's like steeply banked on either side. So the river, if it floods, it runs real fast.
Correct.
This is similar on a smaller scale because it's not as steep, but it's just as bad, especially when you get the rainfall amounts that occurred in that part of northeastern Iowa into far southern, southeast Minnesota into southwestern Wisconsin, where you had upwards of 6 to 8 inches plus of rain in a span of 4 or 5 hours, if that
with some instances.
And it caused major flooding. A lot of roads got washed out, bridges washed out, and they're still washed out right now because you can't fix this in like 5 minutes. So, and there's still flooding going on. There's still rivers coming up. I know here the Wapsipennican is expected to come up to near flood stage, but then it's going to drop because luckily enough, the rivers down here, because the Cedar is going to rise. And this is in Iowa for those that wouldn't know. The Cedar is going to rise. Probably it's not even going to get to action stage in Cedar Rapids.
No, it's too big of a river.
Well, and because there's a difference in Cedar Rapids. You know, big flood 2008, everything floods the end. There's flood stage, which everybody knows what that means. But then there's action stage. All the river gauges have it. That's typically when you have to watch and prepare. In this case, in Cedar Rapids, action stage means the lowest roads, for example, Otis Road in Cedar Rapids, has to close when it gets to action stage because the river starts flooding it. It's not even going to get to that stage. It's going to barely get to it, but it's going to then go back down. So
Otis Road might get wet.
It might get wet, but I doubt it because, yeah, we did get rain yesterday. I had 9/10 of an inch of rain here in my rain gauge this morning when I emptied it. But
I had 1.1 inches here in Marion.
I would say it's going to be. They may close it just for a day, and then they'll open it again. I don't think it's going to get wet, but it's probably going to lap up to it.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's what'll happen.
Here, I think the Wapsi's expected to probably get right up to near flood stage and then drop because and this is neither here nor there about this. The Wapsipennican River at Anamosa, they raised the flood stage. It used to be 13 feet. Now it's 14 and a half. Evidently,
the big change.
Yeah, they're like, yeah, it'll flood. More or less, I think it's because at 13 feet, that's when the hill climb, ground flood.
Yes.
And that's the only thing that floods at 13. 14 and a half feet is roughly when they have to close the state park. And a lot of the campgrounds around the river, especially down in Olin, have to close.
Yes.
So that's when I think they close that. And then I'd have to get into this about USGS shutting off a bunch of river gauges, but we might have to go to that next week because that
might be a whole nother show.
That might be because let's just say the city of Anamosa is not too happy about them closing a bunch of river gauges, aka the one at Buffalo Creek at Prairieburg. But anyway, but the Cedar, the Wapsi's going to rise a little bit. The Maquoketa River is actually rising to the point that the water is going over the spillway at Lake Delhi, which means the lake is full.
Yes.
And they had just opened the thing a couple months ago, and they thought that it was probably going to take all year to fill it. It took, 3 months? and it filled it because it will go over the spillway no matter if it's raining or not. If it's full, it then starts to go over the spillway. So that was when they rebuilt it after the dam blew out years ago.
That's the one piece of good news from this rain event. Lake Delhi is now officially full again.
Yes, because when it's full, it'll go over the spillway. And that doesn't mean, oh my gosh, a big flood's coming. It just means that they're doing precautions that when it's up to full level, it'll go over the spillway. It'll eventually go over the spillway no matter what, because it has to go downstream anyway. So when the water gets to a certain level, it's then going to go over. So don't be afraid that, oh my gosh, it's going over the spillway. It's going to anyway. It's normal. It just means at this point the lake is full, and it's at full, and everybody should be happy. Property values are going to go sky high. For those that would want to know, you should have bought property when it was still just a small little river, because now the property levels are back to what they were. Because there's been cheap property at Lake Delhi for the last couple of years. Your property values there just doubled. Anyway.
And welcome to Iowa Real Estate Network.
Well, yeah. Anyway. So that's happening. But then you have the Turkey River and the Upper Iowa River. Those are up in northeast Iowa. They're very small rivers. They don't go very far into the state, 70, 80 miles.
Mm-hmm.
But they're very small, and they're very in like narrow gorges in northeast Iowa. And I've driven through northeast Iowa several times. You go pretty much up and down, up and down, up and down. You get to a creek. You're at top of a hill. You go down. You cross a little bridge with a little creek, and then you go immediately right back up a hill again.
It reminds me a lot of the terrain in and around northwest Alabama. Anybody that's ever been out that way. It's very hilly, like on the north side of Birmingham, where you're coming up Double Oak Mountain, you come right back down, then you go up, what is that, Cherry Mountain, I think it is?
There's when we're talking about Birmingham, there's Red Mountain, and then on the south.
Red Mountain, that's it.
Red Mountain's on the south side of Birmingham, and then you go down, and then there's, I think, Double Oak Mountain to the east, and then there's a bunch of mountains there, but I know what you're talking about, because
it's very close to that.
Yes, on a slightly smaller scale, because we're not talking about the elevation change is probably about the same.
Yeah,
because you go except from Red Mountain down to downtown Birmingham, that's probably slightly more than it is. And when you think Red Mountain, you're thinking like mountains, and no, it's like a hill. It's a large hill. You wouldn't want to climb it because it's very steep.
Yep.
But they've had the same problems of flooding there, because the creeks are going through pretty much areas where there's a hill on one side and a hill on another, and it just goes really fast straight through. Well, compare that. Iowa has the same things in northeastern Iowa, where the Upper Iowa River and the Turkey River are very small. And when they flood, they tend to flood a lot. This led to the town of, I think it's Littleport or Elkport. I can't remember which one.
Elkport.
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 Many years ago, when the Turkey River decided to flood all over the place, the town of Elkport ended up disbanding, and they tore all the buildings down, and that town doesn't exist anymore because of the river. Well, the Turkey River, I think, was scheduled to get close to record flooding. I think it did. I think Spillville, was that the Upper Iowa River? The Turkey River. I think it's the Turkey River at Spillville. Got to record flooding. It broke the 2008 flood record. So when you're hearing it broke a 2008 flood record, that raises your eyebrows.
Which leads me to my rant. I have to stop.
Here we go.
I talked with a friend about this who was involved in the flood of 2008. And this is my problem with the public's reaction to this surprise flood.
Surprised.
We've been through two of the nation's worst floods in terms of river flooding. Flood of 93, flood of 08. Everybody in this area knows. If you say 93 and 2008, they automatically know what you're talking about by default. If you're from Iowa, you know about those places or those events, which means you know what the heck water can do.
Yes.
Okay. When the rain started falling and the rivers started coming up quickly, almost immediately, local fire departments and police departments started conducting water rescues.
Yes.
Why? We are in Iowa in 2016. We have been through two of the worst floods in this nation's history in terms of river flooding, and we still do not know. Some of us, I'm not going to say everybody not because not everybody is, quite frankly, as stupid as this.
Yeah.
We live in 20. We're in 2016 in Iowa. We've been through all this flooding. We know the drill. We know what water can do. And yet, just a couple hours after those rains started falling and the flood began, people were out doing water rescues. Why do they not understand the concept of turn around, don't drown? Why do they not understand that only a couple feet of water moving at a moderate rate of speed can pick up your vehicle and sweep it downstream?
And it doesn't matter what car, either my Volkswagen Rabbit or let's say like a big Chevy Silverado 2500 heavy duty. It doesn't matter
Precisely.
size.
It does not matter weight. Water will pick it up and it will
Yeah.
sweep it downstream.
Yeah.
And you are in a heap of trouble.
And
yeah.
and unfortunately, one person died, which
Yeah.
when their vehicle got swept off, and that
I was just about to.
Yeah.
I was just about to touch on that. We had somebody lose their life.
Yeah.
Granted, it was historic flooding, and it's still somewhat ongoing. But
Yeah.
compared to '93, which lasted weeks, compared to
Or
08,
months
which
in some
lasted
places.
months, that water was up for months, and yet hardly anybody died with those.
Very few. 2008, I don't think anybody. I think there was in 2008. I think there was some fatalities that were related, but not.
Yeah, not directly from
related,
drowning
not
from
directly.
the flood.
93, there was a few, not many.
Right. Okay. We can get off pretty much fine off of a really, really massive flood that affects a large area, but an equally massive flood that affects a smaller area, yet people just can't seem to collect themselves. Why is that? That should not be. That genuinely upsets me when you can have record flooding happen in a very short amount of time. The first thing that should go into the general public's minds, and yes, I'm kind of calling out the general public here, because we have to do one thing, and that's wise up. The National Weather Service and the Storm Prediction Center did not start that catchphrase, turn around, don't drown, for their health.
Yeah.
They did it for a reason. Water is the biggest killer of people in America in terms of weather-related disasters.
Yeah.
It should not be this difficult. It should not be this hard to push that message forward. And everybody in the professional weather community has beaten it to death. Maybe that's the problem, now that I say that. Maybe that's the problem. But everybody that has anything to do with weather in the Midwest has absolutely driven this point and driven this point and driven this point, and yet we still have people getting hurt and getting killed in a flood state, in a major flood state. Granted, most states see flooding, but Iowa's known for flooding. If you don't see a flood in Iowa in the spring, there's usually something wrong. That's how well known we are for rivers flooding, and yet this still happens. That's got to stop. That just has to stop, period. People need to educate themselves and pay attention. When it starts to rain and you live in, say, Guttenberg or the old town of Elkport or anywhere near that area, you probably have a bunch of hills right next door to you, which means you better start paying attention to what roads you can and cannot take and what roads flooded with this event, and coordinate your action accordingly for the next event, because the clock's already ticking on the next flood.
Yeah.
This one just ended. The next one is already on its way.
We just hopefully not for a while, but
hopefully, yeah.
But this brought a point, and you brought it about water killing people. This I'll bring back the many tornadoes in Indiana, Ohio. How many people died? None. How many died in that flash flood? One. And it brings up a point of this. The flash flood event was in a very small area, from roughly. I'm going to try to take a stab at this. Osage. If you're in Iowa, it's Osage to about Richland Center, Wisconsin, and then draw that line and about 40 miles either side. That was it.
I'd take that.
And one person died. You talk a tornado outbreak from roughly about Indianapolis, well, probably just northwest of Indianapolis. I'm doing like the old tornado watch, 60 statute miles either side of the line. So I'd say 40 miles, maybe 35. Well, I'll do this. 50 miles either side of a line from Crawfordsville, Indiana, where they had the first tornado, which is about the time of the Kokomo tornado. 50 miles either side of a line from Crawfordsville, Indiana, to Toledo, Ohio. You have a larger area of space with tornadoes. Yes, tornadoes and floods are different because floods would only affect areas that have water. If you're on top of a hill, you don't have to worry about it unless you fear your hill is not going to be there anymore, because in this flood event in northeastern Iowa, it was the first time that I saw flash flood emergency for the first time. I'd never seen that before, at least in Iowa. But it was also the first time that I heard about mudslides, rock slides, and I'm thinking, are we now in Colorado? Because it sounded so much like flooding events that occur in mountainous states. When you're talking about mudslides, rock slides,
it sounded a lot like the flood event from Colorado from what was it, last year or the year before?
A year or two ago. It brings up a point too, because there was something. Because the first thing that came to mind too was that. Second thing came to mind was in wildfire areas, when there's wildfires like in California, and everything burns. Okay, so there's nothing left. What happens then when you get a bunch of heavy rain? What happens in those burn areas? There's nothing to support the dirt because there's nothing left. What happens to the dirt? It slides off. You have mudslides in burn areas.
Well, if you look at it in one way, you don't have to pay as much for your cleanup bill because everything gets swept away.
Yeah.
Everything that burnt gets swept away.
Yeah, but it reminded me of that, thinking we're talking about a place that has had a lot of heavy rain. We're not talking about an area that had a fire.
Of course.
But the wording, I think, was very odd, but it was poignant to the point that if you've never seen it before, then you have to take it seriously when they're talking about mudslides, rock slides, and bridges are washing out and all this stuff, and they're wording it like this. Given the fact that I'd never seen a flash flood emergency in the state of Iowa ever, and I saw that and I was thinking, wow, that's a first. It's been a long time since I've seen any of those. In Iowa, I'd never seen it. I've seen it, I think, a few times in other states. But that kind of was the thing, that you issue a flash flood emergency and you still have the audacity to go, and I'm going to go into a voice, oh, I think I'm going to go down in the road and look at there, it's full of water. I think I'll drive down it. So
Yeah.
I wanted to. I have to do at least one voice thing during this show. So
It wouldn't
but
be a show unless you made your voice.
oh, look at me! I'm the king of the flood. Woo! Okay.
That's it, everybody. Thank you. Good night.
Yeah, we're not done yet, but it I think the
For all complaints, go to 1-800-JeffWilcox.com.
no I don't want phone calls. That, I get phone calls now, but anyway. But when there's all this, the I bring it back to a point. I think that we've had the flooding issues, like we mentioned, 93, 2008. And even other events that are not as well remembered, like 99. I think we had a major flood in 99. 1990 was flooding, at least here. But when you have an event, and it's been a long time since we've had one of this magnitude, even though I'm not comparing it to like the Cedar Rapids flash flood event that was a few weeks ago. I'm talking about like an event like this that's like bridges washing away, roads are breaking, stuff like that. We haven't had an event like this in a long time. So I think people get complacent. And this brings up a point we mentioned several months ago about tornadoes. When was the last time Iowa had a tornado outbreak outside of the event we talked about a few weeks ago, that one that had 100 and some weird things? But I'm talking about an event that there's lots of tornadoes, maybe 10, 15, 20, like freaking out that it's going to be bad and people are going to die. The last time we had an event of any magnitude like that was 2008. Was right before the flood. We've had tornadoes, but we haven't had monster, oh my gosh, wedges. Outside of a few, but very, very few and far between.
I don't think since
about
Parkersburg,
tornadoes now.
I don't think since Parkersburg we've had a violent tornado since then.
Yeah, a violent tornado. We've had several moderate-sized tornadoes up to EF3s. There's been one EF4, but nothing really going, oh my gosh, it's going to kill people like lots of people. In this technique, you can't just say, well, a tornado ain't going to kill anybody, because look at Joplin, Missouri. Here comes tornado, kills 150. I mean, in the day and age where tornadoes maybe could kill 1 or 2 or 3 people, maybe up to 10, 20 in, say, a metro area, then you get a Joplin that kills 160, and then you get to the point that tornadoes will still kill people. I don't care if it's an EF5 or an EF0. But people are becoming complacent on if it's not going to happen to me, so who cares?
They're
becoming complacent on flash flooding. They're becoming complacent in everything. Consider thunderstorm warnings.
I tend to somewhat disagree.
Ooh, goody. We're going to have a fight now.
Somewhat disagree. I believe that it's been a long time since we've had a major event.
In severe weather, and even in flash flooding, up to a certain extent.
Correct. But the person that I talked to about this, when I went into my rant, that person gets nervous even to this day, 8 years removed from the flood. They still get nervous when thunderstorms come overhead.
I don't doubt it.
And if that person still gets nervous, then there's got to be plenty more that do, which kind of gives me a little bit, it's kind of backward to say, but that gives me a little bit of confidence that people are still nervous 8 years removed from a flood, where, when a storm comes over, that they pay attention. That gives me a little bit more confidence. They may not be as complacent as they think, but that is the exception, I think, not the rule, because not everybody was involved or affected by the flood of 2008. Not everybody was affected by the Parkersburg tornado 3 weeks beforehand.
Yeah. And it kind of brings up a situation where where in 2008, the flooding was pretty much every river. Now, Cedar Rapids got the big brunt of it because it flooded the entire city, well, the downtown area. But then you look at Des Moines. In 2008, the flooding in Des Moines was less than 93 because they didn't lose their waterworks system and had no water for 3 weeks like they did in 93. So there were certain areas of the state that the 93 flood was worse, mainly in central Iowa, and 2008 was worse in the eastern part of the state. Northeast Iowa, flooding there, and as is the case with this flood too, because it's a flash flood event, the rivers go up really fast and they go down really fast. But like the Cedar River or even to the Wapsie here, the Iowa River, or even the Des Moines River, those are not rivers that go up really fast and go down really fast. They kind of just slowly go up and then they slowly go down because because there's the river and it's flat fairly for quite a while, or it's a slight slope. So the river is kind of just slowly moving. So it slowly goes up and slowly goes down. If it's going up really fast in that area, that's even more concerning because unlike in Northeast Iowa, rivers there will go up really fast and go down really fast because all the water is rushing really quickly.
Correct.
Kind of like rainwater going into a storm drain. After it rains, you have all this rain going. It's raining, and the water's going down along the curb and into the storm drain. Once it stops raining, within about 2 hours, that curb is dry. Or about to be, if the sun comes out, if it's sunny.
Right.
So that's a similar situation to rivers in Northeast Iowa. But if you're like having water going through like a creek, or it'll go up really fast, but it's gonna, or let's say like a smaller, maybe a bigger river, it'll go down, up slow and down slow because there's more water. It's kind of, especially in most areas, it's flatter. Because the Wapsie will, at least here, because it's a little more hilly, it'll go a little bit faster around here, but not by much. But
not really, not like Northeast Iowa,
no. But it's the similar thing about the curb and the rainwater into the storm drain is similar to Northeast Iowa, whereas anything else is different to a certain extent. But yeah, I think I wish that rain had fallen kind of a little bit more lightly because that was a complex of storms. The storms in question, they came into Northeast Iowa and then they just backbuilt and stopped. They kind of sat on themselves and kind of rolled over. They were moving to the east and then they kind of did a west to east trajectory and they kind of just sat there and redeveloped. While here, I thought the storms were going to come down. And they never did. It took forever before it finally rained here that night.
Yes, it did.
So I wasn't surprised about the flooding up there when that happened. So
I was surprised.
I was surprised about the amount.
I wasn't surprised at the amount of water that fell. What I was surprised at was the fact that
water rescues
started happening that quickly. Which
made you think it was coming up way faster than they thought.
Yes. But still, even at night, you can tell where water is. I mean, it's fairly easy to see because on a paved road, you have your stripes and stuff. When those all of a sudden stop in front of you, there might be something blocking your view of those stripes. That would be, I don't know, maybe I'm the only one that thinks like that.
It's either that the water's there or the road isn't there.
Correct. And that to me is just a really big no-no.
Because so that happened.
It's just frustrating because so many people have invested so much time and effort into educating the publics about the dangers of flooding and dangers of water, that it just seems like people need to pay attention quite a bit more. And we have a tropical system.
I was going to get, because we've been doing this over an hour and 20 minutes now, but This is what nobody's talking about Gaston right here. And it's like, who cares about this? They're all caring about this feature right here. The Orange X over the Bahamas, known as Invest 99L. The storm that they said 4 days ago was going to become a tropical system. As you see, it's not. And I saw models 4 days ago that showed that this storm was going to stay disorganized until it got to where it about is now. Then it was going to go up into Florida, then kind of go in, maybe up into Florida, and then kind of move to the northeast. I think it's not going to do that. I think it's going to go into like here, and then it's going to come up. Whether or not it's actually going to, what it's going to be, because it would be named Hermine if it's going to be named. But this has been the storm that everybody's been keeping their eye on. Ooh, this is going to be the system we have to watch. Ooh. And that's what led to a lot of people kind of almost missing the tornado outbreak in Indiana and Ohio, because everybody was focused on this thing right here. So Gaston is probably going to become a hurricane. It's a fish storm. It's not going to move anywhere.
Yep. Shipping lanes, that's about it.
Then we have these storms in the Pacific, Lester and Madeline. Lester is already a Category 2 hurricane, and this storm is just going to go out into the middle of nowhere. It's just going to go straight west. Not bother anybody. Okay? Then you have Madeline, which is almost into the Central Pacific already. This storm, though, as you can plainly see, is going to hit something. It's expected to hit Hawaii on Wednesday into Thursday as a tropical storm. Now, whether it's going to be a minimal or a bigger storm, we'll have to see. But given the fact that this is interesting, that even though we're in what is considered to be barely a weak La Nina right now, because it's not been officially noted as a La Nina, but it's close. So I'm just going to say we're right now in a weak La Nina. To have tropical systems heading into Hawaii in a La Nina is slightly weird and slightly odd, when the Pacific is supposed to have less storms in La Nina years. The Atlantic has more. But the Pacific, it's almost like they're just starting right where they left off last year, except for it started late. The Eastern Pacific started really late, but when they started, I think July had the most storms ever in the Eastern Pacific in one July.
Yeah.
And August is calmed down, but you have Lester and Madeline, this being Madeline's track. So
yep,
we might have something to talk about next week with Madeline probably hitting Hawaii.
Bet your hurricane chasers are booking their plane tickets already.
Yeah, because everybody wants to go back to Hawaii.
Hey.
It's like, ooh, where would you want to go? I want to go to a tropical storm landfall in Hawaii. Yep, that's where I want to go. Because they've already had a storm this year.
I'll tell you one thing that's getting a boost right now in Hawaii is the surfing, correct, along the North Shore. Pipeline, they call it.
Right, yeah, right here, right in there. Mainly up on Oahu, so it'd be right about here. But now
that I bet you they're seeing some monster waves right now. I'd love to see like a webcam of the North Shore. In fact, I might do that once this show is over. Oh, you're gonna do it right now. Live surf cam. Look at that. First one that pops up. Bonsai pipeline.
That's not live.
Oh.
Just say that.
Ah.
If it was, I'd be like, boy, they have YouTube stuff.
Bonsai pipeline's the one. That's the one that's world famous for its massive waves.
And it's 3:42 p.m. there. Yay, so it's daytime.
Oh, yeah.
It's not working.
Loading.
Oh. Boo! Hiss.
they took it down, they probably saw too many viewers.
Surface flat right now, according to this.
Wow.
Oops, we don't want to see that.
Wow. That's different.
I think it's because the storms aren't. It has to get there a lot closer before it'll probably really increase.
Be interesting to see in the next couple of days what the surf does.
Yeah, because as Madeline approaches, the wind is going to come around from the northeast. The trades are going to increase because Hawaii is in the trade wind, so they get winds coming from the east northeast. But as the tropical system is going to approach, those winds are going to increase, so it's going to raise the level of the sea, and you're going to get more wave action. So, but right now it's fairly. There's probably waves. What they call flat is probably like 2-3 foot waves. I think there's a difference between flat in, let's say, California and flat in Hawaii on the North Shore.
That's probably very true.
Because you're not going to you don't get waves like that in California, let's say at Venice Beach in California.
That's true.
I've been there because I've been to Venice Beach and I've been in the Pacific Ocean, and you don't get waves like unless there's a tsunami coming, and then I don't think you'd want to be there.
That's true. I know flat in Australia, in Surfer's Paradise, flat is usually 8 to 10 foot waves, because that's pretty much what happens around the clock, almost like clockwork in that place. If you see waves shorter than, I'll call it 7 feet, then something else was going on, because every day I was there, I went to the beach and there was decent waves coming in all the time.
Yeah, he's been to Australia and I haven't.
Yes, and it was amazing, and I want to go back. But on that note, I must go. I must go serve dinner.
Okay, so we're gonna end it now because my voice is about to die. So next week we'll probably talk about gauges that we were going to talk about, and probably some other 50,000 things that'll occur. So we'll let Matt go and eat dinner and let my voice rest. So we'll see you next week when we'll be into the first week of September.
Yes, sir.
We'll see you then, and goodbye.
Bye-bye.